Welcome back to Air Quality Matters. I'm Simon Jones, and coming up, a conversation with Bill McQuade, at the time of recording this, the outgoing President of ASHRAE. Bill has spent over 3 decades in the HVAC industry and is currently the Global Vice President of Government Affairs and Sustainability at Baltimore Air Coil Company. We sat down for a chat on what would be his last overseas trip of his presidency at Indoor Air 2026 in Singapore. A fitting event, I think, to chat to him about some of his core themes during his year of tenure: indoor environmental quality, centres of excellence, and putting humans at the centre of discussions in buildings. It's a fascinating role, ASHRAE President, I think, the figurehead of an organisation that's over 130 years old, with over 50,000 members across 190 chapters and over 130 nations. An organisation of academics, industry and practitioners, voluntary and impactful. Yes, there's the ceremony of it, sure, but also an unbelievable year of travel, actually meeting all walks of life, living and breathing HVAC and ventilation, and importantly, indoor environmental quality. So, a reflective conversation in many respects, I think, a look at the year gone, but also a forward-looking one, full of optimism with a good dose of reality. He's put some big ideas forward this year, so a great opportunity to chat about these and what's next. As Bill steps down and hands over the rails in Austin a week or so after this recording, we look forward to him getting back to his day job. This podcast is brought to you in partnership with Particles Plus, ACO, Eurovent, Lindab and S&P Ventilation, and simply would not be possible without them. So please do check them out in the show notes and at airqualitymatters.net. This is a conversation with Bill McQuade.
So next week, I actually have to go to work Monday, real work. And then Tuesday, I'm going to Albany, New York. It's my last chapter visit. Not only am I going to be visiting there, I'm going to be meeting with the governor of New York, Hochul, in her office. And that's something that I've done a lot of in this, as I've traveled around, as I've met with government officials, looking for guidance on decarbonization, on indoor environmental quality, on resilience.
Really, that's interesting.
Yeah,
and is that them coming to you for guidance? Is it?
Typically, we'll have connection between our local chapter, but yeah, they're looking for standards. Data centers is another thing. Workforce development. They see the needs, and they look at ASHRAE as kind of the global, kind of leader in much of that information, and they want to know how to leverage ASHRAE technical guidance in their regulations.
Yeah. I mean, I'm sure people in that sector won't say it's come out of nowhere, but boy, haven't data centers become a thing in 2026 and 25. Like, I mean, in your presidency, like, data centers are a hot button issue in so many areas around the world. They must have come up with conversation almost everywhere you've gone.
Everywhere, because I was at MIT last year, and I was talking to one of the professors there, and they described it as this: that every time you do a Chat GPT query, it uses as much energy as charging your iPhone from 0 to 100% and a glass of water. And so if you think about all of the queries that people are just now starting to do, and some of them are frivolous, like making, pictures of a, cat with a basketball or something. But as we get into using that as an everyday tool, that's just a ton of energy, a ton of heat that we got to throw.
Yeah, well, I mean, the nature of search. I mean, I think we've all experienced it. We use search in a fundamentally different way now. We ask a question as opposed to try and figure out the right series of keywords to find the right website where that information, that seems so old school now. Whereas now you go, look, I'm looking at this, I need a computer and I've got to do this with it, and I think I might need to do that. What do you recommend? And you'll get a really concise list of the kind of things to look out for. you weren't doing that even 2 or 3 years ago. You were trying to figure out, like, where the site would be that would have the information
Yeah,
and
you're
and
putting a
yeah,
string of words together. Now you're giving context
yeah,
to the question that you
yeah,
ask. You're like, I'm writing a report or I'm doing a PowerPoint presentation and I need,
yeah.
yeah,
It's mad, isn't
it's,
it?
yeah,
I
it's,
asked the question the other day of it. I said, globally, how much energy and water is being used just by people being polite with you? Because every time, I don't know about you, but like the human nature, you go, okay, I've got a question for you, or and thanks very much. And please, would you look at, do you mind?
yeah,
And thanks. And that's great. And you find yourself talking like you would to a person, right?
right.
But that actually, A, is a waste of time with AI,
Yeah,
and B, is actually consuming every
yeah,
letter. It has to understand the context of a thank you and a please and a so on, and
right.
process it and put it within its, and that cost, and it has an answer. They
Yeah.
know there's been some research on what's the cost of human politeness in interactions with AI,
That's a
and
new
it's
one.
enormous.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah,
I saw a presentation one time on a guy that was talking about so the sustainability of cleaning out your email inbox
yeah,
because by keeping all of these emails in there, that's got to exist somewhere on a server, and that has a carbon footprint associated with that.
yeah,
But the same kind of thing, it's how much energy are we wasting adding characters, right,
yeah.
to a email.
But I mean, kind of all jest aside, this stuff has huge downstream impacts on energy, on
Yeah.
communities, on power grids, but also from like your community's perspective. This is an industry that is absolutely flying at the moment. So your members,
Yes.
like, I mean, and it's potentially quite distracting. I mean, the standards have got to be developed. That that there's skills and labour shortages for that sector. It's an incredibly precise. Talking to people in that sector, it operates at a very high level. It's pharmaceutical esque in its
Yeah.
delivery. So
Certainly
this
inside
is,
the server room, yeah,
yeah,
absolutely. And that's something, not only is it a large business opportunity in the HVAC sector, um, but it has big implications on grid stability, on water use in areas. You have communities that are concerned about the sounds of these units if they're running, air cooled type things, or fans and heat rejection equipment. Um, and when they come in, they are such big energy users. Um, and I don't know if this is the same globally, but I know in the U.S. a lot of times those local utilities, when they have to do infrastructure improvements, they spread that cost among all the ratepayers, right? So you have when a data center comes in, there's a requirement if the grid is limited to do an expansion, the entire community pays for that. But when the data center's done being constructed, it really doesn't employ that many people. So communities get a little upset that they're paying for this infrastructure upgrade, but they're not the rest of the community is not benefiting from an intake of people and economic activity. So that's something, and you're seeing regions push back on that.
yeah,
Um, and I look at it this way, it's a heck of a lot of energy to just throw to the atmosphere, right? So, you know, in ASHRAE, we have a technical committee 9.9, which is mission critical facilities, includes data centers and other like type applications. And that group has been prolific in getting out not only design guidance for creating the data centers, but coming up, we have an energy performance standards for data centers 90.4. And so that group, and it's all the hyperscaler folks that you might imagine, all the consulting engineers and even the equipment manufacturers. It's one of our largest technical committees, but they're putting out the guidance that's being used around the world. So it's a big deal, and even areas of focus from a research standpoint, liquid cooling. There's various forms of liquid cooling that in the attempt is to try to get the total energy use or the PUE down on these data centers, so that there's the energy that it's required for the computing in the server itself, but then there's the energy that's required to cool it, and how can we bring down that energy that's required to cool it?
Yeah, but there's a lot of innovation in that sector. I mean, I'm part of the IEA's Energy and Buildings and Communities (TCP), and a brand new annex that's just been signed off this year is data center cooling and waste heat recovery.
Yeah,
You know, because there's huge potential locked into these centers as well in reusing some of the energy and heat that they're passing off. So
yeah.
there's a lot of innovation in that
Yeah,
tech.
I think that's the future. I think that there's going to be a requirement, and we're seeing already in Germany and some other places to recover and do something useful with that heat, right? So, district heating it's an obvious one, but that's only certain areas and it's only certain times of the year. Is there something that we can do with that heat, like power generation through organic Rankine cycle, or possibly some absorption. The only problem with it is that it's not necessarily a high temperature heat, which makes it a little more difficult to use. But it's just not going to be acceptable to dump that much heat to the atmosphere. We're going to have to do something to recover it.
Yeah, and they have to have an almost backup as well, which generally then tends to be big diesel generators or
Yeah,
the likewise, because they can't go off.
right.
You know,
And they
so
have
that
to be, yeah,
yeah,
able
yeah,
to come
yeah,
on instantaneously,
yeah.
and you can't spin them up. And
I think what's actually going to be really interesting about that sector, and from what I've been told, is it operates on a very different model from a quality and process
mhm,
perspective. So there are very high standards imposed on the construction and handover of
yeah,
those centres, because they have to be, on point. They cannot afford. It's not like residential apartment blocks where you hand it over with 5,000 snags. And the accepted norm is that a building has problems when you hand it over. Like that doesn't wash in that sector.
no,
So it'd be
no,
interesting to see if that kind of finds its way into that kind of mentality of, what, we can hand over a piece of infrastructure or a building that actually fundamentally works day one,
yeah,
because we're doing it here in the most
yeah,
complex environments possible. So why aren't we capable of doing that in a residential block or on an office building?
right. No,
Yeah, because
absolutely.
that blows my mind. That it's still today it's acceptable to hand over an office block, and the accepted norm is that it comes with a year's kind of snagging.
Yeah,
Like what
uh,
other manufacturing processes in the world? You get a car. They give you the car and say, "Here's your car. We think there's about 30 faults in it, but look, work your way through it, and when you bring it back in, we'll have a look at them."
yeah,
That's construction in a lot of
yeah,
ways,
yeah.
isn't
No,
it?
you're exactly right. And we do have commissioning many times with buildings, but they don't do recommissioning. And that's where we go wrong, obviously, with even the best designed buildings. Things dampers, motors go bad or whatever, and things get stuck. And kind of the idea of going back in and kind of recommissioning these buildings over time is really, only done, by people who are progressive, and
Yeah.
it's, yeah,
Well, look, I mean, we're going off a massive
yeah,
tangent, as I knew we would.
yeah,
But I mean, one of the first questions I really wanted to ask you was, like, you're coming to the end of a year of presidency, and
mhm,
one of the key themes of this term, and why, obviously it's smack bang in the middle of this podcast, is a theme of healthy buildings designing for life.
mhm,
And I'm just interested in your thoughts coming up to 12, and obviously you've been thinking about that as you came into your presidency, so this is
right,
a mature kind of thought process for you at this stage. What's your perspective on it now, having kind of been talking about this idea and opening up the conversation around indoor environmental quality and water and setting up the Centre for Excellence? It's been a real theme of the last 12 months and more, I guess, in
yeah.
germination in your own mind. How, looking back now, how do you see that, and what's your thoughts, having travelled around the world and talked about these
Yeah.
ideas? What that reception's been like?
Yeah, kind of the genesis of this idea really came to me back when I was at AHRI. I had a working group that I led of a bunch of manufacturers, and we were talking about, post-pandemic, what was the future of equipment going to be? And kind of hearing the manufacturers who had already done the R&D and invested in developing air cleaning or IEQ type of products, and said there's just no demand for them. And it made me think about how quickly we were reverting back to bad behaviors post-pandemic. And I thought about all the good work that ASHRAE and other organizations had done during the pandemic to really understand, obviously it was airborne infectious diseases, but the air cleaning and indoor environmental quality in general. And I didn't want to see us go back to the way it was before, because it would just come back to haunt us in the future. And so I wanted to codify those lessons learned and make sure that it's not just something that then gets buried again in some kind of economic calculation, that it's something that people remember the fact that we build buildings for people, not for pretty plaques on the wall, right? And we've done a great job as an industry in terms of energy efficiency and now carbon, emission reductions, um, and those seem to we have minimum performance standards by governments. We have people who are progressive in thinking about net zero buildings and net zero carbon buildings, but we really haven't focused on making buildings that are excellent from an indoor environmental quality standpoint. And that's really, it's about the people in the building, not about the building. And so I wanted to make sure that we focused on that moving forward. And that's kind of the genesis of doing that. Um, and certainly there's ASHRAE's always done a lot on air quality. We do focus on thermal comfort too. Standard 55 is 60 years old this year, and kind of that understanding of the importance, like we talked about earlier, of not only temperature, but humidity and air speeds and how that impacts the comfort of the individuals, and how that can then relate to productivity or wellness outcomes. That was something that I wanted to make sure we continued to bring forward. Obviously, acoustics and lighting have a real impact on people's ability to be productive, or they're reducing stress levels, or just kind of aligning with their circadian rhythms. And then the last one that I think doesn't get enough play is really the importance of water quality in buildings. We make an assumption that the water coming into our buildings is safe and clean, and it's not. I mean, the incidence of waterborne disease has continued to increase almost in an exponential um, direction over the years. And it has a lot to do with just aging infrastructure. It has a lot to do with changes in the way water utilities are treating water in the last 25 years, moving from chlorine to chloranamines, and kind of some of the unintended consequences of that. And also looking at, there's been a big push to reduce water use in buildings, right? With these water sense, efforts with low flow faucets and shower heads and toilets and all of that. Um, and we've reduced water use in buildings by about 40%, but we haven't downsized the piping inside the buildings. So you end up with the water stays in the pipes for a longer period of time. That water age has been shown to be very, tied to an increase in incidence of waterborne disease, because the water spends more time in touch with biofilms that are in the water distribution system. So
Yeah, and at kind of building temperature. Yeah,
yes,
yeah,
so
yeah.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, you're right in that temperature range where bad things can grow. And so that's something I think we haven't, as an industry, or at least as ASHRAE, haven't focused on enough, because that's the plumber's area, but it has huge implications in people's health in buildings. So I wanted to bring that into my theme as one of the pillars of indoor environmental quality. So you have air quality, thermal comfort, acoustics, lighting, and water. And
Yeah.
so that's something that I wanted to bring forward also. To your original question, what am I seeing around the world? I've been pleasantly surprised at the focus that um, indoor environmental quality and indoor air quality specifically has been getting this year. As I've gone to South America, Brava, their focus is on indoor air quality. In Europe, Riva, some of the national associations like ICAR and others have that as a focus this year. And then, of course, you go to Japan and they're a step ahead of everybody when it comes to air quality, sustainability, and resilience. So I think I've been pleasantly surprised at the momentum that's moving forward. The Air Club this year and kind of the excitement around that, I think is also good. I think we're at a point now where we can really push it forward and get it in people's minds. But we need to get to those operators and maintainers, those building owners. It's not just the designers,
It's
because I think
interesting, isn't it, what you say there? The there's some real analogies between, or similarities between, the water and the air quality there for me in how you were describing that, and that is that ASHRAE has been unfairly, or fairly or unfairly, depending on your position, accused of dropping the ball when it came to air quality. That there was a focus on energy efficiency and reducing ventilation rates, and you know there are very solid standards in 62 for air quality.
Mhm.
So I think parts of that are unfair, but I think what it shows, regardless of your position, is that sometimes you need to refocus on the basics.
Mhm.
What's the purpose of some of this stuff? And
Mhm.
as you've rightly said, it's putting people back in the center of buildings as we build buildings for people. And it was interesting when you were talking about water there, that in a way you could argue it's a similar story.
It
The
is.
focus has been on water reduction and doing the energy thing, and making the building more efficient. And there are unintended consequences of that, that if you lose focus for a while, all of a sudden you see what everybody assumes has been put to bed of public health and water safety,
Mhm.
all of a sudden creeping back in.
Yeah.
And it just goes to show, doesn't it, that these core premises of buildings, of building buildings for people, that all of this whole indoor environmental quality umbrella is about people, and there's a constant process of refocusing and reminding people that while we have these counter, well, not even counter weights, but focuses on energy reduction or maybe cost reduction, or whatever the focuses are, we still need to remind ourselves that buildings are there for primarily for
Right.
us, and we can't, even if we think a standard is good and solid and deals with air quality as an example, that somehow we need to keep bringing it back and refreshing it and getting it in front of people.
Yeah. It's I've been in many net zero buildings that were extremely uncomfortable, right? And I think that there's been such a focus on energy, even through regulation, that it's been easier to focus on that. And there's been a lot of like ratchet type regulations that require you to do better every year. Um, and there's been minimum performance standards when it comes to energy, and certainly our 90.1 in ASHRAE is an example of that. But when it comes to indoor environmental quality, thermal comfort, which is like our standard 55, or the air quality ones, the 62 series. Those have typically been called out in regulation, but they're not a comprehensive minimum performance requirement. And many times, and this is always frustrating for me, I'll see local codes that call out one section of 62, not the entire standard. It works as a comprehensive, approach, and they'll pull, oh, well, these are the minimum required air, outside air rates. It's not done in the context of the entire standard, and that, you know, I, I would love to see eventually a minimum performance requirement for IEQ in general, And that's something that the new Center of Excellence for Indoor Environmental Quality it's one of our first things that we're working on is developing a comprehensive IEQ standard that could be referenced in code or in regulation. And it will pull from all of the individual standards, the 55s and the 62s, and even on the water side, our standard 188, which is a risk mitigation standard for Legionella. But it will set a minimum across the board requirement for a building as a way to kind of set that bottom bar. Of course, you want to have the ability to do performance beyond that, but as we build awareness, it'd be something that I would love to see regulations require it, just like they do for 90.1 as a minimum standard. And then we'll move to do more high performance standards after that.
Yeah.
So that's one of the first steps. The other thing that the Center of Excellence is going to be focused on is really looking comprehensively across the industry at what are the best practices in terms of thermal comfort, air quality, lighting, acoustics, water, and then identifying where there's gaps, right? Where do we need to do work, whether it's research or develop design guidance or standards? And then how do we partner with other organizations like ISIAC and REVA and other folks around the world, and not just in our HVAC industry. You have the public health folks, the medical community, the industrial hygienists. There's lots of folks that have similar goals that we can work together. And if we can avoid duplication and instead kind of target ourselves to take different aspects of where these gaps exist, I think we can make a big difference in a very short period of time. So ASHRAE has a global scope, and I would like to be a convener of these organizations to work together, and I'm hoping that the Center of Excellence acts as that. And that doesn't mean that everybody does it ASHRAE's way. What I'm saying is, let's get together, we'll figure out what the best practices are, and we'll move forward. And those can be ASHRAE best practices, or they can be, someone else's, and that's fine.
Having been looking at this and talking about it for a year and meeting folks from all parts of the world about this, what's your sense of the scale of the challenge here? Because I'm interested from ASHRAE's perspective, because it's a practical
Mm-hmm.
organization. It's practical in the sense of it's real people in chapters who are the customer industry facing
Mm-hmm.
people. And this isn't a high tower view of the world.
Yeah.
This is on the ground implementation organization, right? And indoor environmental quality is very easy to say. It's an incredibly complex beast to even comprehend in the round. I mean, we're at a 4-day ISIAC
Mm-hmm.
indoor air conference, and the depth just in this one pillar is just phenomenal.
Yeah.
I've got a lifetime of podcasts ahead of me, and I still won't hit the bottom of the depth of knowledge. And that's just one of the pillars.
Right.
And you introduce sound and light and water and thermal comfort into that mix, and then the interactions between those.
Mm-hmm.
There
Yeah.
are unintended and intended
Yeah.
consequences of each on the other. And then the multidisciplinary nature of bringing the round
Right.
into play here. Have you had moments kind of on planes and going to bed going, oh my God, what have I started? Because the world was much simpler if we were just trying to reduce energy of HVAC systems,
Yeah.
frankly,
Yeah.
and this is I mean, that's I guess why you've got some really good people in the Center of Excellence. I mean, this is a beast
Yeah.
of a concept.
It is a beast, but there's so much opportunity to make a big difference by doing even small things, right? And I certainly developing new buildings that are both energy efficient and have very good indoor environmental quality. To me, that's very possible. The tools already exist. There's approaches that by improving thermal comfort, you can actually use less energy, preventing overcooling, all of those types of things. This is maybe this is an understatement or an overstatement, but I think new buildings are easy. We have a huge stock of existing buildings that we need to address, right? And, you know, there's things that we can do, very basic things that we can do from an operational and maintenance standpoint that can make a big difference in those buildings without doing a whole bunch of infrastructure upgrades. And so, what I'm finding as I've been in these conferences and I've talked to folks on the ground is there's a real lack of knowledge of what to do by the building operators and maintainers. Um, and even if you put an air quality monitor in there, what do those numbers mean? What's good, what's not good? There's just kind of a lack of awareness by the people on the ground. And so one of the first things we did this year is to develop operational and maintenance checklists for each of those 5 pillars of indoor environmental quality that are downloadable and free. And we're gonna launch those in 2 weeks at the annual meeting and put them on our website so that building owners and operators can download those checklists, and it gives them, without necessarily having to know what the technology and the science behind it is, the basic things that they should be doing and checking on within their building to make sure that they can, improve the indoor environmental quality. So I think getting that kind of information out. The other thing that we've done is we created this year a series of 11 short YouTube type videos, 5 to 7 minute type videos that uh, introduce the concepts of indoor environmental quality and what the health impacts are and where to get resources on those. As because what's the first thing that all of us do when we're trying to learn something new is Google, right? I'll Google, indoor environmental quality or air quality or whatever. Hopefully those videos can pop up and give people some idea of where to go for that. Those videos are available on our resource website. And then the other thing that we did is we created some similar to like podcasts, but our tech hour presentations that are available on our ASHRAE 365 app for free that really focus down maybe for more of the technical people on air quality, on moisture management, on risk mitigation for water, those thermal comfort. So those things are out there in a more technical form, but getting the awareness out there and providing people with the tools to do things right, particularly for existing buildings and particularly on the operation and maintenance side is one way I think that we can make very short-term steps that can make a big difference. And that's so I think that's a first step. The rest of it is developing design guidance and operation and maintenance guidance that are more technical in nature, and that'll be something that the Center of Excellence each year does a priority of what needs to be done and then actions, projects to do those.
Yeah, I mean, it's important to remember, and I forget sometimes the who ASHRAE's members are, who the customers are for this, and these are folks that are on the ground delivering, building, maintaining, demolishing buildings, right? Through the building's full life cycle.
Mhm.
And in the round, these folks need to know what this looks like practically.
Right.
The science community will debate and argue time immemorial about the value of a CO2 reading, right? And often let them have it,
Yeah.
right? But practically on the ground, these people are not only having to implement these things, but they're also often the voice for the customer. They're the ones that are articulating what this actually looks like,
Right.
what a roadmap actually is going to be for a building. So that's really the task of ASHRAE, isn't it? It's providing those roadmaps, those tools, those checklists, the language,
Yes.
articulating what this big, great thing is all about. A bit like the early days of sustainability, right? You've got to find the language and the tools and the skills and the plain English for people to implement this. And that
Yeah, and
That's really important, because actually, and in a way, sometimes that's the easier part, because I often say it on this podcast, there are only so many levers we can pull in a building, right? When it comes to air quality or thermal comfort and so on. And yes, there's innovation and science, but practically it's really interesting. All this massive complexity you're funneling through the conduit of a building. And the HVAC and the heating system and what have you's got to handle it, and the lighting system and so on, and often there's only so many things we can do there, so often it boils down to a checklist. All of this complex air quality 4-day debate over bioaerosols and particulate matter boils down to what MERV rating on a filter I'm going to need,
right,
and
where the
how
rubber
often I
hits
need
the
to
road.
replace it, and how do I know it needs replacing, and what's the fit, how do I make sure it's got good fit. That's what it translates ultimately into, isn't it?
Yeah, and just if when it comes to air quality measurement devices, that the teacher in the classroom doesn't need to know, necessarily why a certain value is too much or not. They just need to know to look, and if they notice something wrong, to alert somebody, so it can get changed. And so I think kind of building the awareness, not only with the owners and operators, but even with the occupants on the importance of it. And that's why I think it'll be important for us as a community, to elevate this beyond a capital investment discussion between an owner and a architect and a mechanical engineer, to really look at things in terms of what the societal health outcomes are, from poor indoor environments. So how do we tie, when it comes to regulators and legislators and even kind of the general public, their perception of indoor environments and how that can affect their long-term health outcomes, as they age, and the importance of making sure that we have spaces that actually make us more healthy, protect us, make us more productive, and not just something we have to tolerate because it's too cold in this building, or the air quality in here is terrible. I don't like it. I think that'll be the important thing, and if we can do that, then I think we get beyond just that capital discussion, beyond the, well, if I'm going to invest in something, I'm going to invest in an energy efficiency because that's going to affect my utility bills, versus maybe not having the understanding that the costs here affect your medical costs and societal's total medical, costs, and long-term health outcomes, across the society. So that's something that we talk to the EPAs of the world, and the Department of Energies of the world as an industry. We need to be talking to the health and human services organizations around the world to really, emphasize the importance of buildings and health outcomes. And I would love to see kind of those minimum requirements or even incentives for building owners to come from that side of the house, rather than trying to get it from an EPA or a DOE, which is maybe more focused on external environment resources and air quality and water quality.
I'll have you back to the podcast in just a minute. I just wanted to briefly tell you about Eurovent Certified Performance from Eurovent Certification, a partner of the podcast. We all know HVAC systems play a vital role in improving indoor air quality. However, there is a risk that some products may not live up to expectations. Even the best installed and maintained HVAC equipment can underperform if data used to specify products and design systems is incorrect. Consequences can include poor indoor air quality, increased energy consumption, increased maintenance, system failure, and non-compliance with regulations, and that's bad for everyone. However, there is a way to ensure products perform as advertised and deliver good, sustainable indoor environments. Selecting products
holding Eurovent certified performance ensures that the manufacturer data has been independently and impartially verified. Eurovent certification's stringent certification process not only guarantees product performance, but energy efficiency too. I met some of the Eurovent certification team back in January at the Indoor Air Quality Matters conference and was seriously impressed with what they're trying to do. Their core aim is to create transparency in the industry by making certified data freely available. This means you can directly compare the performance of products to make informed decisions. Their certified product directory holds vital information on everything from air handling units to air filters. So don't take a chance on unverified products. Trust in proven performance. Details, as always, in the show notes at airqualitymatters.net and at Eurovent Certification. That's www.eurovent-certification.com. Now, back to the podcast.
How do you think, and how does ASHRAE think about the measurement of success here? Like, how do the feedback loops operate within ASHRAE? Because like these are complex beasts, like in totality. I mean, we were saying this is simple in effect of design guides and standards and checklists and so on, but we know from experience that often checklists aren't followed, regulations aren't understood. We were just talking about people taking part of an ASHRAE standard and not all of it. Like, how do you think about measuring efficacy of some of this work? Because it's so important, isn't it? We're not making standards for the sake of it. We want to see outcomes. And here, this is human health at the center of this, human health and well-being and comfort in building. So it's important that we know that we're saying the right things, producing the right checklist, explaining it in the right way, constructing a standard in a way that's followable, not a minefield of word salad, which many of them can end up being. You know, how does that work for you? How do those feedback loops work in ASHRAE?
You know, I think, you know, if I could envision, you know, if we're successful 5 years from now or 10 years from now, you know, I think when we look at the design of a new building, and I'll start with new buildings, that there from the get-go, there'll be a looking at balancing of energy efficiency requirements and indoor environmental quality. So that's going to take a comprehensive approach to building design. So as we, you know, we've developed a lot of design guidance around energy efficiency, right? We've done a lot of design guidance around indoor environmental quality, particularly air quality, but we haven't created kind of that comprehensive approach that does both at the same time. So, you know, long term, I envision that the center of, we have a center of excellence for indoor environmental quality. We have one for decarbonization, that those two are working together to develop a comprehensive approach that can be followed by architects and engineers when it comes to mechanical systems that does both. So that would be my ultimate goal. So every new building that comes out has that balance already built in. I think from, you know, when it comes to existing buildings, kind of having the public have awareness to the importance of it and it become a priority or something that they look for when they're leasing a building from someone, or when they're building a new building, that it's automatically, hey, we have to make sure that these things are right. And then in particularly residential buildings, I think there's very little awareness around, you know, what you can do in your house to improve the indoor environmental quality and particularly the health outcomes. I think it's just people have no idea. And I think, I was talking to Carrie from ISIAC about, you know, could we, between our two organizations, put together kind of a things that you can do as a you know, individual homeowner to your house to improve indoor environmental quality, the easy DIY kind of things that we could do right away. So building that public awareness of the importance of it And I often think about how much, people spend on supplements and health devices and all these things to improve their longevity. If they had any idea how much their indoor environmental quality probably impacts that, they would readily go and put air cleaners and humidifiers and everything else in their homes. But I don't think we've done a good job as an industry to really market that to residential type of areas.
Yeah, it's a really good point. I wrestle with that one, I have to say. It's a really interesting one, and we've seen it with littering, we've seen it with sustainability, decarbonisation. This battle between personal responsibility and systemic responsibility, right? The trade-offs between having agency and outcomes and relying on state and systems and
Yeah.
structures to do things. And even this week, I've had keynotes from the likes of Lido Marauska talking about the need for buildings to automate and deliver indoor environmental quality excellence for us, which is kind of the system doing that for you, versus the what can we do as an individual. And both are valid,
Yeah.
but can be used nefariously at the same time as well. It's your responsibility to make sure you open the windows, right?
Yeah.
And let fresh air in. I thought it was the HVAC's responsibility to make sure I was getting enough
Getting
air
out there.
change rates, right? Whose responsibility is it? So it's a really interesting. I don't think there's a right or wrong answer in that. Interestingly, it's one of those debates I think that will always be there. There's always an element of wanting agency to be able to come in here and control a temperature and thermal comfort or air quality.
Yeah.
For listeners behind the camera, I've got a fan that I wedged the door open with to blow some air in. And this is a modern
Yeah.
building. Like we feel like we want agency in these spaces. Whose responsibility is the air quality in this space?
Well, often, we'll get pushback, particularly on the residential side, from the home builders. And, when we want to add new requirements to residential buildings, whether it's energy efficiency or indoor environmental quality, there's a lot of pushback there because they'll say, look, the owners don't see a value in this. So when you add these requirements, it's an added cost that affects my margin because my price is set by the local market, right? And if the homeowners don't see value in it, I'm basically giving something away, right? So, which frustrates me because it's the right thing to do, but at the same time, I can see their argument. So, what we need to do is build that awareness so the homeowners see a value in it because they know what impacts it has on themselves, and then they'll be demanding it or at least be willing to pay for that upgrade. They'll see a value in it. Then the homeowners or the home builders will want to do it all day long, right?
It's such a challenge, isn't it? Creating that demand for something that drives, there's value in a marble worktop for a kitchen. There's value in an oak staircase for a house. These things have intrinsic visual value that a developer will put into a building because it increases the price of the house.
Right.
You don't get more for your home that you're selling because you have a better HVAC system in it, right? It's an intangible. And so this is where you always get this, the minimum becomes the maximum when it comes to standards, is that, okay, what's the least I can get away with?
Right.
Because I'm not rewarded for doing anything more than that. And that's an eternal challenge for organizations like you, I know, is that the minimum standard, the floor, the requirement we're trying, the worst possible scenario allowed by law, or advice becomes the design principle, and that always means any failure at any part of the supply chain to meet that design principle means automatically you're below the standard.
Yeah.
And this is why we find so much failure to meet minimum standards or minimum codes, is because they become the guide for what I need to do, because there's no perceived value in it.
Yeah.
That I know all standards organizations wrestle with how you manage
even
that.
on energy efficiency side. And I work for a manufacturer, and I've worked for manufacturers my whole career, and it used to frustrate me because our most efficient equipment, only about 25% of the customers would specify it, and that's on a good day. And those are usually the the campuses, the long-term owners. But when it comes to the tenant building commercial real estate market, the tenant pays the utility bill.
Yeah.
They're only going to put the minimum required equipment in from an energy efficiency standpoint that they have to do, because the return on investment for them is, it doesn't matter, right? The
Yeah.
tenants are paying the utility bill. So that's something I think we definitely have to build the awareness around the value of it, and quite frankly, I'm not a big proponent of a lot of regulation, but when it comes to these types of things, you have to set a minimum standard and then ratchet that up to
Yeah,
improve.
actually, Rachel Hogden from IWBI, I articulated it beautifully in a conversation with her, and that it was this visualization of the regulation creates the floor, the good practice creates the ceiling, and it's the space in between that we live
Yeah,
in,
that we
right?
exist in.
And the higher we set the good practice guides, the demonstrator cases, the centers of excellence, the more room we give to ourselves to
Yeah,
breathe and live and flourish in a building. You always need the floor, but you need the ceiling as well. You
yeah,
need to understand. You need to understand what that gap is, and it's articulating that for people as a challenge. And I know one of your watchwords this year has been validation,
yeah,
and performance. And we are moving into a very new world where we can see our buildings and measure our buildings in ways that we just weren't capable of even
right.
10 years ago. And that must change the narrative for you as well. Like when you're thinking about centers of excellence and thinking about new standards, that we can now evidence the efficacy of these because
Yeah,
there is data coming out of buildings in ways we couldn't even imagine. And
yeah,
then you introduce AI now that can look at the complexities of those interrelationships in ways that we couldn't possibly do. I think that changes the narrative of anything, because it moves it from a was this building compliant on day one to your reputation living and dying based on the ongoing performance of that asset.
right,
That's it. It's almost irrelevant whether it met 62.1 or whatever
right.
when it was handed over. You will be judged on the day-to-day, a bit like your car, on the day-to-day miles per gallon and efficiency and serviceability of that
Yeah,
product. And I think that I don't know if the industry is ready for that. I think that's a real shift in mindset, that you will be held accountable, on year 2 and year 7 and year 15 of that asset. And over time, brands and organizations will be blacklisted or have poor reputations and PR as a result of the performance of
yeah,
the products that they create 5-10 years down line,
yeah. I do think AI is going to take building controls to a whole new level. Where the building can adapt to changes in occupancy, or um, you know uh, notice when it's off its baseline, and alert you. That's ever since I've been in this industry, there's been a lot of talk about having the fault detection type of um, you know controls, where your building alerts you when something's going wrong, or your HVAC equipment is inefficient for some reason, and to get it checked, kind of like we do with our automotive cars. Hey, you get a check engine light,
Yeah.
and
Well, it's this kind of no
but
lights principle, isn't it? What you want now is controls that are identifying failures before they
right,
become a fault.
right,
Like
exactly,
what's it called? Lights off.
yeah,
The lights off strategies.
and I think that's where we're going to get to with AI here eventually. So, and then you pair that with what you mentioned, low cost sensors that can, now it's not just CO2 sensors that you have, VOCs, I mean, there's all
Well,
kinds of,
water quality, acoustics,
yeah,
lighting. I mean, everything is measurable.
yeah.
Frankly.
And if you have the AI and a brain that can, a mechanical brain that can, or electrical brain that can warn you when things are off, maybe things get addressed more often, and also it gives you accountability. You were made aware
Yeah.
that things aren't right, and you didn't do anything
Geez, we've
about
been
it.
doing it with automobiles for the last decade
Yeah,
and a half, right? In your vehicle, there's a brain that's got connected to about 328 sensors in your vehicle and is giving you very basic information about how to, when it needs a service, or that this your brakes need changing or whatever it is, you know, and it's keeping a record. And when you take it in for a service, if you've not been looking after it, the garage knows,
Yeah.
you know, and all this information's going up to the manufacturer. Like that, we've been capable of doing it with a 50 grand asset for 10, 15 years.
Yeah.
Like, so it's coming, I think.
Yeah. And that's, you know, I even think another analogy that would be great from a regulatory standpoint is, you know, where I live in the US, I have a safety inspection and an emission inspection required on my car every year, right? So, you know, why shouldn't we have the same requirement on a building asset? I'm not saying every year, but every couple years, you know, an inspector, maybe a commissioning agent comes in, evaluates your building, identifies areas where it's inefficient. You know, you need to fix this, this, and this, and also from an environment standpoint, where you have issues, and then requires you to fix it in order to maintain your occupancy.
Well, work by your own group, you know, the likes of Max Sherman and Ben Jones are the guys that really fed into 241. Their work on harm intensities, which I know is feeding into some of the 62 standards, is showing that indoor air quality in the residential setting, it has twice the DALI death and disability impacts than road traffic accidents and injuries. Right, so we can already make an epidemiological argument that this stuff is costing our health more than the automobiles are. So why not? I mean, on that basis alone, we should be assessing and MOTing and, you know, validating, you know, our buildings every year. Just purely on that, I would argue.
And you know, governments might push back and say, well, the amount of infrastructure that would be required to do that is very costly. But right now, with the, you know, inspection stations and things like that, you have a for-profit agency that's been certified to do the inspections. The cost of it is set by the state, and they do the inspections and administer the stickers and all those kinds of things. I think that you could come up with a business model that enforcement is done by for-profit
well, do you know what?
organizations.
That reminds me of a really interesting conversation I had in Ireland a couple of months ago, and it was with my local mechanic, because my vehicle was due for in Ireland we call it the NCT, the safety check, and I took it into him for a service, and I said, look, this check is coming up. And he said, well, look, put it in for the test, and when they come back with a list of whatever it's failed on, we'll then fix it and go in for a retest. And we were talking about what a monumental waste of time that was, putting an asset into a test centre just to find out what the faults are, for it to come back to then be fixed and then have to be retested. And in the UK, across the water, it's a very different process. The mechanics are licensed to provide the test. So you can say to a mechanic, I want a no faults outcome for the MOT, particularly if you want to sell the vehicle, because there's major faults that you have to fix that are saved. You know, the tyres are bowled or the brakes are failing or whatever. But there, you know, there's always small items like your number plate light isn't on or something simple. So you can say to the mechanic directly, I want do an MOT and I want a no faults text, or they can do the MOT and when they're doing it, if they see a failure, they can fix it there and then, and then it passes. So the efficiencies are really there. Now there are swings and roundabouts with both. The independent test centres are independent, and you can argue that the mechanics are incentivized to pass something, right? And so that you have to be able to weed out the bad apples in those cases. But there's real efficiencies in the person that is servicing the vehicle passing it, if it's properly managed. And I can see real analogies with that within the built environment, that we've got a whole industry full of HVAC professionals, building professionals that are already in those buildings, servicing and managing those buildings. To train and certify them up, to be able to do those annual checks and pass them, seems to me to make eminent sense. You're not going to be able to push a building down to a local test center,
Right.
right? Or otherwise you're going to have to create an entire new infrastructure of independent testers to do it.
Yeah.
But we've got a whole army of people that already know those buildings, know where those fire dampers are, where the outside air damper is, knows the make of that fan, and where to get the new belt drive from, and they're all there, you know. So we just need to find a way of enabling them to and empowering them to test those buildings, you know.
And there's a business model there for
Yeah.
them to do it. So it's I think it's to me that would be an approach, because you left to your earlier point, if you leave the building owner, and it's not just an owner problem, but if you if you leave the maintenance and owner structure to its own devices, it's going to put things off until they can't, right?
Yeah.
And so I think if you had periodic, it's like recommissioning a building every so often, you're gonna over time have a much more efficient or a much healthier building if we do that. And I think the long-term health implications of poor buildings warrants, to your point, that doing that type of thing.
Yeah, I think there's so much more we can do. It's crazy that we have these assets that we just kind of allow to run to failure, basically, once they're handed over. In almost no other walk of life do we do that, you know, and we reap the repercussions of it as a result. You know?
And I also think, when you look at, the World Health Organization and the amount of deaths that they attribute to indoor pollution on a yearly basis, you're talking over 3 million, and over 200,000 of those are children under 5. It's something that, in developing economies, there's probably very simple things that we can do to make big impacts on health outcomes. And that's something too, we can't, in the developed countries, we think about all of the gadgets and things that we have for the high performance buildings. But I think there's a lot that as an industry and as a society we can do to really help those developing areas with just, very simple approaches to improving indoor environmental quality, where you have, the solid fuel burning in buildings or in, for heating or for cooking and those types of things. So I think, as we do the very complex things, we also need to continue to think about the more simpler things that can make a big impact on overall well-being.
That's a really good point you made, and it was one of the questions I wanted to ask you was this global role that you found yourself in, where you really have been traveling. I mean, anybody that follows you on LinkedIn, it's quite astonishing, your schedule. Where I think I don't know if it's like one-upmanship, like president to president.
No.
Just like I traveled like 2 more times a year, but it's getting ridiculous, frankly. I mean,
it's been wonderful, but it's been a lot.
I know, yeah, and really important too. But from a perspective, I imagine it's been a really wonderful experience, but B, quite an eye-opening one. Like nothing resets your perspective better than traveling from the US to Europe to the global South, from Asia to India to Africa. Like the differences in culture, in building typology, in economic status, in controls and building laws. It's a rich tapestry, right?
Yes, it is.
and I think, we often, and we fall into it all the time, we fall into speaking about the built environment through the lens of a North American, European ideal.
Right.
And this idea of modern Western modernity that simply doesn't translate into a lot of spaces. Has that been that must have been quite profound for you, traveling, like talking, getting on the ground, talking to the practitioners of spaces, but in such a wide variety of countries, from the Middle East to Africa to India to North America. I mean, like, it's astonishing.
Yeah, I think from a North American or even European perspective, you think what they're dealing with, but until you actually get there and see the types of trade-offs they have to make, or their decisions, between eating and doing something differently with their housing,
But
or
not
even
even economically, right? Like just from
uh,
an environmental
oh, no,
perspective, the
no,
difference between
absolutely,
somebody has to make decisions in an ultra cold climate to a like where we are here, where it just doesn't stop being hot and humid. Like that's a weird,
yeah,
that's requires a completely different, regardless of the economic status of a country, requires a completely different
yeah.
perspective about a building, doesn't it?
No, absolutely, and even like India for me is that there's the dichotomy in India. You have these a tremendous number of green buildings that are being built in India right now. At the same time, you have some of the most primitive structures that people are living in every day, and I often think about India. You have the most populated country in the world now. They have a they have very little cold chain structure, refrigeration from getting food from the field to the table. 75% of that food gets wasted on the way,
Wow.
and it's one of these things where, eat from our industry standpoint, how much impact could we make just helping to build out that cold chain so that people are able to get food to the table, and India could become an exporter of food rather than just trying to feed their own population. And so, I do think there's different perspectives when you get there on the ground, and I've learned a lot. ASHRAE does, the global South is something we talk about a lot. How do we help South America? How do we help Africa? How do we help places like India, to move forward and to make improvements. And some of it is even just from a safety standpoint. Our whole world is transitioning to lower global warming potential refrigerants, and some of those are flammable. And you have folks in Africa who are trying to service buildings, and they have very little training, and people are getting hurt. So
Yeah.
we've worked with UNEP to develop training programs at ASHRAE, and I think you'll see in Sheesh Rakesia, who will be president of ASHRAE in 2 years, really a focus on how do we really serve the global South better than we've done in the past. Um,
And from a localized perspective, I think, for me anyway, I think it's really important that places like in India can create an India that's fit for them, that we're not just importing standards and regulations and
yeah,
ideals that fit our narrative, that because that there's huge opportunity in India. We're talking to Rangareddy Burry there yesterday, and one of the interesting things about that conversation is both the potential of places like India at the moment. It's just exploding. I mean, anybody that goes there,
oh
just
yeah,
you get a sense of it. The demographics, the population, the economy, the raw talent that's on the ground
yeah,
there is just inspiring. So that it's exploding, but it has to make some decisions that are right for
yeah,
India, right? And that we might think we know what we're talking about, but there's definitely things we can bring when it comes to safety and so
yeah.
on. I get that, but this really has to be crafted for them,
Yeah,
right?
and they have to have input into
Yeah,
what
yeah.
it is, and so there's a couple things that we've done in ASHRAE to do that. We have a committee that we've created in our technology council, and in the purpose of that committee, it's called GTIC, but the purpose of that committee is to evaluate our standards and design guidance, and understand how it needs to be modified for these types of regions. And the members of that committee are all people from India, from the global, outside North America and Europe. And the purpose is to really identify what standards and guidance they need, and how do we tailor that and create a version of that that's much more tailored to what they need. And so in the past, I think with all good intentions, we've sat maybe and a bunch of folks from North America and Europe have developed standards for what we think they need. But you got to get input on the ground. And so we're doing that. The other thing that we've come up with through our Center of Excellence for Building Decarbonization a flexible building code um, uh, evaluation tool that governments can use to help kind of tailor building codes around their particular needs. So it's a framework or a structure, and it has a bunch of tools that help them kind of walk through a process of defining what they need specifically in building codes. And we've piloted it in Ghana, and we've piloted it in Lebanon, and we have a couple more pilots that are working on. So rather than just trying to shoehorn our 90.1 into to their needs, we've created tools that help them identify where their needs are, and then we can pull resources from different places to create that for them. So that's kind of a new approach. I think that could be used even on the IEQ side, kind of understanding, what the basic needs are, and where to make the biggest impact. And quite frankly, what resource you have to fit something to the resources and the infrastructure that they have.
Yeah, no, totally. And it's something that GRES do very well, actually, is the kind of the relative benchmarking approach. I mean, it's a financial term, but it's the same kind of ideal that yes, there are the absolute benchmarks for things, right? But also there's a relative benchmarking, how that building sits comparatively to the buildings and environment around it.
Right.
There's no point having an indoor air quality standard based on, Ireland or WHO standards and just shoehorn it into Delhi and then benchmark that building against a building in Dublin. It's just not going to be comparative,
no.
right? So there's huge value in that kind of relative approach to say what's fit for purpose, and how do we start to categorize and benchmark buildings and spaces based relatively on the infrastructure that they have or the environment that's around it. And that applies everywhere. It's not just a global south issue. It's just making sure that what we're doing is fit for purpose in spaces.
Yeah, it's a journey, right?
Yeah.
It's something where, we have to set the ultimate target, but we have to understand that there's a journey, and interim technologies at times are what you need to kind of keep continuing to move forward. And I always take the analogy of like the CFC issue and the Montreal Protocol. That was a 20-year journey, and we allowed initially for some less harmful but still ozone depleting solutions to help bridge us to the ultimate, non-ozone depleting HFCs. And we allowed developing countries to move at a slower pace than developed countries, so that the developed countries could create the technologies that then could be leveraged in the developing countries. So kind of that approach where we're not trying to do it all at once. Make sure that the perfect isn't
So enemy of the good, isn't
enemy
it?
of the
Perfect, not
good,
the
right?
enemy of the good.
So
Yeah.
exactly. So let's allow that journey to happen.
Talking of journeys, I imagine you started on this journey 12 months or so ago with some things you wanted to get done. Is there any unfinished business on the table that
Um,
you'd like your the next person to carry on your behalf?
yeah, I think things have gone as well or better than I could have hoped, in terms of the initiatives that we had, and from the beginning, what we got done, kind of the willingness that I see with other organizations to work together with ASHRAE to help solve some of these issues, and I'm very hopeful at this point of what we can do going forward. The thing that needs to be carried on is the follow through with these organizations. And the creation of that Center of Excellence for Indoor Environmental Quality is really the thing that I see to really carry this forward beyond my 12 months. So I think and I'm going to be involved in that as vice chair going forward, and I'll be very interested in making sure that it happens. But I do, as Sarah comes in and Ashish after her, I want to make sure that they don't. We don't drop any of these relationships that we've created, or these partnerships that we've talked about along the way. And knowing those two, that won't happen. And Wade coming after them, Wade Conlon has spent a lot of time in, particularly in indoor environmental quality areas. So I expect that that support will continue. Um, but I think that's the thing. I just want to make sure that we continue to follow through with it, and I'm not going to go away. I'm going to be part of
Still
it.
part of it,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. So
Is there a formal post-presidency role? You like a former president? Is
that,
there like a
yeah,
year of
there
doing
isn't
that?
a
Yeah.
on our board. There isn't a past president
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
role or anything like that. So you literally fall off the cliff. The
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
emails stop. Everything stops. We do. It is traditional for the outgoing president to become the vice chair of our nominating committee, and then become chair of that the year after that. And the purpose for that is you've just spent the whole year visiting all these places, seeing people who have high potential, and you bring that to that table, and also you have that overall perspective of the organization and what's going on externally. Um, but yeah, no, the presidential members of ASHRAE really, for the most part, stay very involved in driving some of the bigger initiatives, as kind of the project leaders or managers, or the chairman of those committees. So that's kind of how we stay in and kind of keep things moving forward. And we're also always a advising kind of counsel for the current president. And I've certainly leaned on people like Bill Bonfleth, who is here, or Bjarne, or others, when it comes to getting their thoughts on decisions that we need to make.
Yeah, it's
So
a hell of a legacy
yeah,
within ASHRAE
yeah,
of people around with experience. You know, you
yeah.
see it everywhere you go. It's quite phenomenal. I mean, how big's ASHRAE at this stage now? It's a hell of an
We're about
organisation.
54,000 members
Yeah.
in like 137 countries. We have over 200 chapters worldwide, and over 400 student branches. We focus a lot on the next generation. So not only the students as they're getting their education, but then as young professionals, we have it's an organization called YAY, Young Engineers in ASHRAE, and it's really big people 35 and younger, so early career type of folks. And we focus on leadership development, technical training, networking, all those types of things. So we're really focused on bringing that next generation forward, so that our initiatives and legacy continue well beyond when we're out of the industry. So
Yeah.
it's something that you know, it, I think it's something that draws people into ASHRAE. You get that, kind of, uh, you get a love for helping humanity. ASHRAE is not a commercial organization. We're not a trade organization. We're a society of individual contributors, and really for the benefit of society. And I think the type of people that we attract in ASHRAE are really, about doing good for the world.
Yeah, and
And that.
outside of specific projects, I mean, we've been talking about a phenomenal amount of endeavour here, but I mean,
Hmm.
this is all voluntary. I mean,
It's
this
all
is it.
volunteer.
Yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
there's a few kind of paid kind of like particular projects, but the vast majority of this is purely at the voluntary nature of the
Yeah, and
members.
that's, we also, sometimes people forget, we do about $7 million worth of research a year, and that research really, informs the design guidance and the standards that we do. And where do we get that money? That we raise that from our own members. That's not, we don't take any grants from, governments. Occasionally, a foundation that might have a focus area on education or something will work with them. Um, and we've done some project in as a partner with like the Department of Energy in developing like the advanced engineering design guides and things like that, or advanced energy design guides. But we don't depend upon government funds in order to
No.
do our strategic initiatives. And that's why when you have changes in philosophies with governments, it doesn't change what we do.
Yeah, the
We
bellwethers stayed pretty solid. Yeah.
we're still focused on decarbonization. We're still focused on indoor environmental quality. We don't kind of flop in the wind.
Well, there's some fundamental principles behind buildings that are just are beyond political cycles, I
Yes,
suppose. Yeah.
and that's governments can be great partners at times, but the fact that we raise our own research funds independently
Gives you that
allows us to do
separation.
that.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And mostly because most of you got day jobs. Talking of which, like
yeah,
you've got a day job, and for
I do.
people that don't know you, I mean, there's a whole other side
Yeah,
to
yeah,
Bill, right?
yeah.
Yeah. What is it? And
Yes,
you're back to it, I guess, full
yeah,
steam ahead.
yeah. So I work for a manufacturer of evaporative equipment, Baltimore Coil Company, and I do government affairs and sustainability for the company globally. And so they have been, my boss is the president of the company, Don Fetzer, and he has been a fantastic supporter of what I'm doing. And I've tried to do both jobs at the same time, which at times has been very difficult. And he's been very understanding and given me a pass on not being present for some of the important meetings that we have internally. He understands the impact that I can make on the industry and on humanity, and he always tells me, he's like, don't worry about it. We'll get you when you come back.
Yeah.
And he's like,
Kind of a
just,
sabbatical
yeah,
almost.
he
Yeah.
said, do the best job you can. You made a commitment. And so I couldn't be more thankful for that support, because they're still paying my salary. My salary at ASHRAE is zero,
Yeah.
just like every other, volunteer on a
A zero
technical.
salary, and there's not a big entourage of staff, I noticed, that follow you around the
There's
world.
no
No
staff.
PAs and PR
No.
people, and
I
like,
mean, yeah, ASHRAE has their
I
own
know,
marketing department and all of those types
yeah,
of things. And if I'm stuck and I call, someone's going to help me out. But no, there's no one making my travel arrangements or doing anything like that. It's all
yeah.
on me to coordinate with our local regional chairs. We have 16 regions around the world, and so each one of those has a chair. And so as I visit, for instance, where we're at here in Singapore, this is Region 13. I work with Ong, the regional chair, to set up the chapter
Got you,
visits
yeah,
and all of that.
yeah.
So.
Nothing else your air miles have done well in the last 12 months.
Yeah. But what's fantastic is ASHRAE is a big family around the world, and everywhere I go, it's the same type of people. So you really feel a connection as you go around. And I've been treated wonderfully, and just being able to see not only the members, but also the students that those members support, and how excited they are about, what they're doing to help the environment and help our industry move forward. It's really inspiring.
And I guess
It's
you'll
unbelievable.
take an enormous amount from this experience into your day job.
Oh,
You know,
sure.
both perspective, the connections you've made, the knowledge you've gained, all of that stuff, I
No,
guess.
absolutely. I mean, and it's what better way to see what the trends are, around the world, and from a technology standpoint, from a market standpoint. I don't think I would have fully realized the potential of India and how that's going to be exploding if I hadn't
Being on
spent
the
all the
ground.
time,
Yeah.
in all the different. I think out of 11 chapters, I visited 10 or something like that in India. But to see what their real needs are, and yeah, you can't help but take that knowledge back.
So one final question, because I know you're an innovator at heart, right? I mean, I think
Mhm.
there's even you've got some patents floating
Yeah,
around.
well, I
Yeah, yeah,
designed
yeah, yeah.
equipment for a long time, and so
Yeah. So
yeah.
yeah, I know that's kind of where your heart is at as well. What excites you over the next kind of 5 years? Having been around and traveling, where
Hmm.
where do you see, like, what's the if you were saying to some young people coming up through,
Hmm.
you want to have a look over in that corner, like there's some really
Yeah.
exciting stuff going to happen in the next few years there.
Yeah.
Anything kind of
I mean,
spring to
the
mind?
no-brainer, of course, is AI, and how that's going to impact not only how we design buildings and design equipment, but how we run buildings, and really, I'm so excited about improving the way we maintain and operate buildings. So I think, and that's, I'm sure everybody sees that one. Data center cooling, improving that. Again, that's good. The data centers are required to make the AI work, so they're here to stay, even with the pushback that you see in some regions. But it's a real opportunity for us to find more efficient ways of not only cooling those, but then reusing the energy, as we talked about earlier. I think there's a real opportunity
Yeah,
to
it's a
do
real
that.
innovation in evaporative cooling as well, isn't there, in
Yeah,
data centers? Yeah.
there's from there's hybrid and adiabatic cooling, and so there's kind of a whole spectrum between the most open cooling, where you have full water cooling that has most efficiency, and then as you do, you can use less and less water with different technologies and get you know a different variation in your energy efficiency, but you can tailor it around the needs of a particular area, from dry coolers to full open towers. So that's in my own business. That's kind of a cool thing. But thermal energy storage, really getting to net zero carbon and even energy is going to be about moving BTUs around the building. So, radiant cooling, taking, the heat or energy out of one building and using it in another place, another campus. I think that's going to be exciting to see what technologies that we create to do that. Um,
And look, in an unsettled world, and there's a lot of, and particularly, places like India where there's a huge shift from call centers and opportunities within traditional spaces that they're worried about AI taking over. That talent has got a good home in
yes.
buildings and maintenance and engineering. Like there's huge opportunity here for the young coming through to go into a space where AI is going to support as much as be a risk
Yeah.
for careers going forward.
Yeah. And I often look at the technicians, just how things have changed. Really, they're the limiting factor on how high performance our buildings can get, right? And back in the day when I started in this industry, your technicians needed to know how to solder and do sheet metal work, and the most complex thing was probably the pneumatics, that we used to use for controls. Now you basically have to be an IT guy on
Yeah.
top of on top of all of those
Yeah.
other skills.
Yeah, go out and learn
Um,
Python. Like, yeah,
yeah,
yeah, yeah,
yeah,
that's
you
where
know what
it's
I mean?
going.
So
Yeah.
it's that's a huge change. And I think, that's something that we do in ASHRAE, is promote the technical trades as much as possible. And I do think it's, with the cost of getting a 4-year degree in engineering, you can go to technical school, and, if you have a little bit of gumption, in 3 or 4 years, you could own your own business and do
Yeah.
much better than I did at that age, very quickly. So I think there's a real opportunity there, and that bias toward, oh, you have to go to college to be successful. That's, to me, that's old thinking now. It's, the trades are in high demand everywhere I go.
Yeah.
I don't care if it's Africa or South America or Europe or North America. The thing that I hear when I sit down with business owners, I'm like, what's your biggest issue? It's workforce development. We
Yeah.
don't have enough technicians. The engineers we're getting out of college don't have the kind of knowledge we need for the HVAC industry. So
I was smiling in here. The power sockets tripped out. The floor box was shorting or something when we stood on it, and uh, one of the maintenance guys came down. He said, "Oh, I'll get the electrician to come. I'll tell you when he's coming." And both of us sat in the room and went, "Well, that'll be next Friday." Instantly. I think the global perspective, like we were from two different parts in the world, and we both looked at each other when he said, "Oh, I'll have to go and get an electrician." We were like thinking, "Well, that's going to be middle of next week."
that's what it is.
But as it happened, there's somebody
Yeah.
in the building that does that stuff. But it was that's kind of the
Yeah.
narrative here, isn't it? Like the trades everywhere you go. I mean, there's a shortage of
Yeah.
engineering and trades globally. That's
Yeah.
it.
And even in ASHRAE, that hasn't been traditionally our membership, but we're hearing so much of a need for it. We're talking to contractor associations and technician associations to work out, how do we develop training modules,
Yeah.
that can help, bring these people up to speed.
Yeah.
And it is a limiting factor, I think, with high performance buildings is, you can design them and build them and everything else, but if there's no one there to maintain them, they're not going to maintain
Most
it.
of the cost of construction, the demand and supply of construction, the transformation of the built environment, all of this is limited by skills and labour.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter what your aspirations are as a government or a local authority, you are hamstrung by the availability of skills
Yeah.
to implement it. And it shows what a strong position ASHRAE is in to support that. Bill, thanks so much for spending time talking to me this morning.
Absolutely.
We've chewed through an hour and a half or so without trying. I knew that was the case.
So hopefully you can patch that together.
Yeah, no. And I've been
Something.
chasing Bill around since September, I think, last year. And we said, well, we must sit down. We keep bumping into each other
Yeah.
at various spots around the world. But I think it's been really serendipitous. I've caught you right towards
Yeah.
the end of your trip, just as you go back through India and visit the 11th chapter you never got to on your way home. We'll see you on the other side, and we'll see you.
in
Look forward to
Austin.
catching you in the Indoor Environmental Quality Centre of Excellence. I think that's going to be really exciting to see how that progresses, led by Marwa Zataria, I think. Going forward.
Just July 1, Marwa.
Yeah.
Wade, who was chairing it, is going to become our treasurer. So in a couple of years he'll be president. Marwa's going to take over as chair, and she's fantastic.
Oh yeah,
and then
tour de force.
I'm going to be vice chair to support her in any way I can and to make sure that it continues to move forward. But I expect great things out of the Center of Excellence. I think you're going to see it really move things forward, and I'm excited about the future.
Well, we'll pop notes. We'll put links in the show notes for both the Centre of Excellence and the videos and ASHRAE, obviously. And Bill, look, thanks a million. Really appreciate you talking.
Absolutely, thank you.
Before you go and head off to whatever it is you're going to do next, or even listen to another podcast, can I ask a favour? If you like what we're doing here, please do spread the word and let's keep building this community. Do like and subscribe and check 5 stars if you can. All that stuff really helps with the reach of the show. These podcasts are not possible without our sponsors, Particles Plus, ACO, Eurovent, Lindab and S&P. So thanks a million to them. These shows are simply not possible without them. See you again next week.